Greetings, fellow seminarians. It took my Reimagining congregation missions class to slow me down and do some research that I had always wanted to do about Calvary Episcopal Church in Wadesboro, North Carolina. I welcome the opportunity of looking deeper into the advent and growth of a rural Protestant parish in the Deep South, especially one that had been built in an area where the plantation system was deeply rooted. I started with our newly updated parish history. Calvary was organized in 1820, just 3 years after the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina was organized. James Monroe was President of the United States, and there had been only 4 previous presidents, and 3 of them were still living. Only 37 years had passed since the end of the American Revolution. 2 missionaries were primarily responsible for bringing the Episcopal faith to Anson County, and the Reverend Thomas Wright would, in 1821, become the church's first rector and is credited with naming the church Calvary. Over the years, missionaries provided by the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel would help the small church meet the needs of its faithful, including slaves. That original wooden building, which included a balcony for slaves, was described as a neat, commodious edifice, which does much credit to the liberalism of the few Episcopalians in this place. Those few Episcopalians came from the original settlers of the area, mainly English beneficiaries from the original land grants from Charles II. Note the use of the word liberalism. In 1893, a brick building was built, which remains to this day. Calvary has provided stability and continuity in this very rural part of North Carolina. Wadesboro and Anson County are landlocked in an area known as the Sandhills of North Carolina, not quite the Piedmont or foothills, and not quite the coast. It has never been overly populated, and the last census shows the population has dwindled to under 30,000 residents. And I have to put that in perspective with my previous tradition at St. Matthew Roman Catholic Church in Valentine in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we had at least 35,000 members. That's how big that church was. It was the largest church largest Roman Catholic church in the United States. So here I am in a county whose population is less than the size of that congregation. So that kind of puts things in context and focus for what I'm trying to describe today. Most of the land here has been passed down in families through the generations, or it was acquired when it was exploited by carpetbaggers who converged on the area after the Civil War. The economy here still is largely agrarian. It is based on farming. Originally, plantations of cotton, corn, and tobacco provided and built fortunes for families whose names cover the sanctuary of Calvary on brass memorial plaques. Then, as the Industrial Revolution gained a foothold in the United States, mills were built here in Anson County and in Wadesboro that turned Wadesboro into a boomtown that offered even more opportunity. These mill owners made fabulous fortunes, but sadly, with NAFTA, they began to die out. There's only one mill left here now that is genuinely functioning, and the word through the grapevine is that it will be closing by the end of October. This county has always been the exception to the rule, as I have been told, as far as politics go. Surrounded by more conservative and Republican counties, Anson County has remained largely blue and Democrat. This area is home to Baptists of various affiliations, independents, AME Zion, Free Will and Pentecostal traditions, Methodists, Presbyterians, Roman Catholics, and of course, Episcopalians. The congregations in uptown Wadesboro have diminished greatly in keeping with national trends. 5 major white congregations sit on the hill that dominates Wadesboro, formerly members of a racist elite interchurch council. The uptown churches were where deals were made and power was centered. A very physical division in the town is US Highway 74, which divides the black and white communities. And you can see there's not much diversity in this congregation on a Sunday morning in Calvary Episcopal Church in uptown Wadesboro. Calvary has not had a major controversy according to its written history, citing one instance in 2003 when Gene Robinson was elected bishop to the Diocese of New Hampshire. Calvary lost its pastor over that and some valuable members, but stuck to its tradition of welcoming all and stayed within the Episcopal Church. But that term, major controversy, bothered me. Surely in 2 centuries there must have been some other major controversies. So I went back to a paragraph in our church history and read, Calvary's doors have always been open to everyone. While the attendance of slaves in the early days might have been involuntary, there are numerous records in the parish register of baptisms, confirmations, marriages, and burials of free colored. To me, that statement just sort of seemed to be dismissive of a white supremacist past, saying that even though they were slaves, they were offered salvation through a white expression of the gospel, through what the white man thought their salvation should look like. To me, that was a major controversy. I thought about integration and how that major controversy may have played out in Wadesboro, and what was Calvary's role. I interviewed parishioners and community members about integration and how it played out in its early days. Many members of Calvary were teachers, school principals, and elected officials at this time. One was the county sheriff. Another was a sitting judge. These men and women interpreted integration as a good thing for the community, for equality, and as a result, other factions in the community ostracized and threatened them. There were instances of dynamite being exploded on the front lawns of some of these forward-thinking members. And the Ku Klux Klan was, and I hear is still active in the area. And the Klan even held a rally and march here through the main streets of Wadesboro in the early 1960s. One of the people that I interviewed was a child at the time, and they still speak of how terrified they were at this pageant of bigotry. One underlying theme was the role of children and how they did not understand segregation. Our church administrator told me that she did not understand why her black playmates stayed to themselves at school after integration. She told me of a time that she mistakenly entered the blacks-only door at her uncle's store and received a severe punishment. She told me of times when a black family came to work with her and her family in their fields, and at supper time, the black family sat outside on the porch while her family ate inside after working side by side all day long. And she told me of cross burnings on her lawn and other lawns in the area. Although members of Calvary thought they were doing what was best for equality and moving the community forward, both blacks and whites were adversely affected. In retaliation, an all-white private school, Southview, was established, but members of Calvary resisted sending their children and kept them in public schools, as did some of the Methodists and Presbyterians. However, through all that, a new school that had been built exclusively for the black community suddenly became a white and black school, and tensions rose. Additionally, the prestige that black educators enjoyed in black schools in black communities waned as they found themselves relegated to lesser positions within the school system. A system of sections 1 through 6 was developed, where 1 was the smartest children, the white children, and sections 5 and 6 were mostly composed of black children. The message was devastating. White children viewed black children as dumb, and black teachers were looked upon as lesser qualified by their white colleagues. 2 members of Calvary, I understand, rallied to change this system. One was an elected school board member, and the other was the high sheriff. Both were threatened. On several occasions, the KKK paid a visit to the sheriff to post a bail for black incarcerated men. The sheriff refused, knowing the man's fate. Cross burnings and threats were then stepped up, but these members, backed by other members of the church and the community, did not back down. During one interview, I was told about Norwood Teal, the leader of the KKK in Anson County. There was a saying that if a black man crossed his path, he was never seen nor heard from again. And I was told of and taken to the farmland that Teal owned, that he used to bury the bodies of blacks that had been tortured and lynched, men and women. I was told about a pond in an undisclosed location that probably holds the bodies of black and indigenous people, victims of the KKK. This interview reminded me of The Cross and the Lynching Tree. I don't know if any of you have read that by James H. Cone. Integration was not well received by either side, black or white, and for the first year there was turmoil and violence in the county schools. Calvary's members reached out to members of the black community in solidarity and many times at their own risk. Integration, however well-intentioned, brought about the beginning of the end of a once vibrant black community on the town's main thoroughfare, Salisbury Street. In a community that was pristine and glowing with community pride, blacks enjoyed their Saturday night juke joints and lifestyle, while whites enjoyed their lives on the hill. Blacks had their own doctors, library, and churches, and integration began to end that. Additionally, throw in NAFTA, which closed mills, people started to lose their jobs, and blacks were usually the first ones that did become affected by losing their jobs. They suffered the worst. Salisbury Street began to be run down, and it became and still is a haven for drug dealers, gang violence, and human trafficking. In no way is the Episcopal Church or Calvary exonerated for its complicity in the oppression and the exploitation of blacks and indigenous people by trying to do the right thing through integration and throughout its history. The stain of human bondage cannot be erased. I do think that it is unique that in this little pocket of rural America, where many think that the residents are gun-toting, conservative, racist rednecks with an extremist agenda, Calvary in Wadesboro begs to differ. That is true of the community at large. Calvary, through the hosting of roundtable discussions, continuing work in racial equity, outreach, as you see here with our much anticipated and well-attended wiener and marshmallow roast every Halloween, we make actions speak louder than words. We see ourselves as a leader in reconciliation, and fortified by the works of others in the community, we are continuing to offer a harbor of some stability.